Hi, I'm Jonathan M0JSX. Thanks for joining me. And TIDRADIO have sent me this, which is the TIDRADIO TD-H3. For the purposes of full transparency, TIDRADIO have sent this to me for review. But as with all of my reviews, TIDRADIO will see this at the same time you do and have no editorial control over what I'm going to say. Although I will be honest with you, it's mostly positive. Let's start by what comes in the box with the radio. Obviously, radio itself with the SMA antenna. It's the opposite way around to what we might see from Yaesu or Kenwood or Icon, but it seems to be the way that China does these things nowadays. We also get a rather large, I'm not sure whether the camera's going to focus, just take my word for it, it's a 2,500 milliamp hour battery with a belt clip. I've obviously attached that belt clip. It's not supplied on the battery, but is in the box with the screws. And just while we're here, I want to just point out the shape of the chassis has been designed in order to have the battery fit in, so the whole thing feels nice in the hand and a good size, but means that they can maximize the battery capacity, which I think is a really neat thing. And then radio itself, we'll come back to that in a moment. Also in the box, we have a charger with a USB Type-C connector on the back. There it is. We also have a USB-A to USB-C cable, which is used for charging. Also in the box, we have a handy little card, which tells us we can go to walkietalkiesoftware.com to download a user manual, programming software, and product operation video. You don't necessarily need to use their programming software. Chirp does a really good job. And then also how you can get some customer support from Facebook or WhatsApp. Not that I've done either of those things. And a handy dandy manual, which I have to say is in pretty good English. It shows you how to do pretty much all the functions of the radio, including how to program it using Bluetooth, using the OD Master app. Again, slightly more on that a little bit later. So let's have a look around the radio. Oh, I did forget to mention you get this lovely lanyard as well. I do like a lanyard, or hand strap if you want. Anyway, let's have a look around the radio. We'll start on the front. If I turn the radio on, we can see that we have a really nice, clear 1.44 inch colour screen with a fully backlit keyboard, full DTMF capabilities here. On the left hand side we have three buttons. We have not one but two PTT buttons, and finally a programmable button at the bottom out of the factory that enables the torch or flashlight. On the top, as I said, we've got that SMA connector. It's the male on the radio, so female on the antenna, which is of course different to how we expect to see come out of Japan from some of the large manufacturers, but as I say, it is becoming pretty standard for the Chinese manufacturers to do that. In the middle, we have a torch or flashlight, and I'll be honest with you, I've never really seen the point of putting a torch on a radio, but at least in the case of the TD-H3, this thing is bright. You could actually use that as a torch. What I don't like is the fact that you have to go through a flashing mode in order to turn it off. I wish you could just turn it off, but never mind. And then you also have a rotary on-off and volume control. On the right-hand side of the radio, under this rubber flap, we have the standard 2-pin speaker mic connection, which you can also use for programming. But why would you? And just below it, you have a USB Type-C connector, which is for programming. So you can grab a USB cable, plug that into your computer and program it using Chirp or their own software should you wish. However, the eagle-eyed among you will see that that's not the only USB Type-C connector on this radio, because there is also one down here on the battery, which is pretty similar to the TD-H8 with the USB Type-C connector on the battery. While we have the H8 here, let's just do a quick size comparison. You will see, if I just take the antenna of the TD-H8 off, you will see that the H3 is much smaller than the H8, but the screen, also slightly smaller, I would say is not a huge difference, that they are pretty similar. Like the TD-H8, the TD-H3 has built-in Bluetooth for programming. As we've already touched upon, you can use the OD Master app available for both iOS and Android in order to program the radio. And while you can laboriously do a full programming job using that app, I found it far, far quicker just to use Chirp on my laptop, and that was able to program the radio extremely quickly. I also found some issues using the OD Master app on my iPhone. I wasn't able to get my iPhone to communicate with the radio. However, I also keep a spare Android phone for doing things like this, and was able to use the Android phone in order to program the radio, no problem at all. I don't know whether that was just me. I don't think I'd signed into the app, which apparently you don't need to do, but maybe you do. Definitely mileage may vary, but as I say, using Chirp, I was able to program the radio using USB Type-C. I did also check that you can still use an old programming cable, and you can, but as I say, if you want to use the app, it should work for you. Now, I do just want to touch upon spectral purity. I don't have any way of measuring spectral purity. However, Hayden over at Ham Radio DX does, and he's had a TD-H3 for a couple of months. And in the screenshot from his video, you'll see that it does comply to the FCC standards. Some things I do just want to highlight is that the keypad, yes, it is all here, and yes, the buttons are well defined, and yes, they are backlit. They are a little bit on the small side, but then the whole radio is quite small, so you know, what are you going to expect, really? But at least they do have nice definitions. You run your finger over them, you can clearly feel each button as you pass it. I also handed this over to my missus to find out her thoughts. She thought that the screen was a bit harsh to look at if you're in low light conditions. I suppose I agree with her to some extent. If it is quite dark, the screen is very bright. If you're using this at night, looking at the screen is definitely going to ruin your night vision. It would have been nice to see some way to have toned that backlight down. You can turn it off, but then you can't see it at all. Or you can change the backlight timer. You can either set it for, I think it's 15 or 30 seconds, but you can't actually just turn the brightness down. Okay, that'd have been nice to see, but I suppose for a sub $50 radio, that's not too unexpected. Another downside for me is the antenna. Now, it is the same antenna that TIDRADIO supplied with the TD-H8, which I didn't find was the best performer in the world. However, it's easily replaced. You know, the whole thing, this is probably going to be one of the cheaper components, and I would recommend picking up a Nagoya NA701, which will far outperform this antenna for about the same length. One other oddity I found with the radio was to do with this second PTT. Let's just hold it up to the camera up here, and you can see that I'm monitoring two frequencies. I'm monitoring my All-Star node on 1453375, and also the GB3WH repeater, which is a little further away from me. I know I'm not going to be able to get into just from in here without an external antenna. But if I transmit on the top VFO, you can see that correctly it says I'm transmitting 1453375. If I swap onto the other VFO and then use the bottom PTT button, it correctly does the shift and shows me that I'm receiving on 145650 but transmitting on 145050. However, if I then go back up to the top VFO, or the top PTT button, but leave it monitoring on the sub VFO, it does the shift and looks as though I'm transmitting on 145050, but it's not. It is transmitting as it should be on 1453375. So I think that's just a bit of a firmware bug, to be honest with you, that I hope TIDRADIO do sort out soon, because I would like it to display the actual frequency I'm transmitting on, regardless of which PTT I press. Just finally, the TD-H3 is sold in 3 different versions, although you can change the version of your radio once you have it. It is sold in a ham radio variety. However, I will say that the ham radio variety is set up for the sort of North American frequency range. So if you're in Europe, it's going to cover everything you can do, but it's also going to be able to transmit outside of the European ham band. So just bear that in mind. If you use your radio in order to tell you when you're out of the ham band edges, this radio is not going to be able to do that for you because it will transmit beyond that. It's also sold in a GMRS version, which is completely pointless for us here in Europe. But if you are in America and you wanted a GMRS radio, then this might be the option for you. And then it's also sold in an unlocked version, which basically means it will transmit 137 megahertz upwards. Great if you wanted to use 220 megs over in the States, although do be wary about the spectral purity. It's not necessarily rated to transmit them. You can pick up your TIDRADIO TD-H3 for $32.99 American from the TIDRADIO website. There's an affiliate link below, and it's available in those 3 different versions as I've already discussed, but also in black, as you see here, or in green, or in a crystal, as TIDRADIO call it, which is kind of a clear plastic case, which actually looks quite nice. Love to know what your thoughts on the TIDRADIO TD-H3 are. I have to say, having used it, it sounds quite nice. The speaker's not the best in the world, but you know, it's quite small, but certainly perfectly audible, even in quite loud environments. Yeah, let's have a chat down in the comments below. What are your thoughts on the TIDRADIO TD-H3? Thanks very much for watching. There's a like button if you've liked this video. There's another button that seems to work just fine too. And if you haven't already done so, please do click on that subscribe button, as it really does help me out. There's another video coming up over here that the algorithm thinks that you might like next. Until next time, 73, bye-bye.